Hey, I'm Lacey Healy, and this is Things That Go Boom. If you're Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko, first off, thanks for listening. Secondly, things have really been tense for you lately.
Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko says he needs guarantees that Russia would defend his country if it was attacked.
You weren't always as cozy with Russia as you are now. Sure, the big bear next door was an ally, but you wanted to hedge your bets. Like a lot of dictators, you're kind of paranoid about losing your fiefdom. So what did that look like? Well, it looked like John Bolton talking you up on the airport tarmac near Minsk in 2019.
In my conversation today with President Lukashenko, which lasted unexpectedly for 2 hours and 15 minutes, we covered a lot of ground. I thought it was a fascinating conversation.
For years, Lukashenko kept up a tricky balance to hold on to control, courting NATO just enough to keep Russia on its toes, refusing to host a Russian airbase, and maintaining an independent state in the process, all while cracking down on any dissent at home. But that balance of power shifted in 2020 when protests grew to a fever pitch after it seemed like our boy Lukashenko might have been the beneficiary of a rigged election.
Our aim is to show the government that we are not their slaves.
We never elected him, and we want the change.
The EU supported the opposition, and it was a moment that totally overturned the delicate relationship that Belarus had with its Western neighbors. It also led to some surprising moves, like a spicy Lukashenko courting thousands of asylum seekers from the global south and pushing them toward EU countries, like Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland.
If you don't follow the orders, force may be used against you.
Which brought us to where we are today, to a refugee crisis on the border of Belarus and Poland that peaked in 2021 but is still going on now.
They take us at night. They tell us this way, there's no Polish police.
We are playing us like a football. The Belarus will beat us, push us to Poland. The Poland will catch us, beat us, push us back to Belarus.
Every day we come into Poland and they send us back.
Poland has called these refugees, these real people, a hybrid war tactic.
The objective is to destabilize the situation in Europe, first time since the end of the Cold War.
And then frames them as part of the same provocations as the low-flying helicopters and Wagner soldiers more recently amassed next door.
Poland is boosting its military presence at the border after 2 Belarusian helicopters violated its airspace.
We've known, obviously, for some time that Wagner were rebasing to Belarus. These exercises along the Polish border pose something of a security concern for Poland.
Poland's Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki has claimed the migrant standoff was the first sign of Russia's intentions to stage a war. A few months later, Putin attacked Ukraine.
Last year, Poland finished a new 18-foot-high, 116-mile-long wall through Poland's most ancient forest. And this summer, it sent thousands of soldiers to keep watch. But this episode, it's not really about Belarus or even about Poland. It's not even really about that border crisis. It's actually more about bugs.
See that metallic turquoise on the... there we go. If we turn them upside down, that makes them really easy to identify. Ooh. That really nice turquoise metallic color.
His legs are going out super fast.
Yes.
And it's not about those kinds of bugs either. Well, it's not just about those kinds of bugs. Because to understand how a border conflict in Eastern Europe is impacting primordial ecosystems, we need to weed out the bugs that come with mass data sets of surveillance footage. Biologists are hoping that AI systems can make sense of it all. And they're not alone. Today on Things That Go Boom, from zoology to citizen journalism, how people are using digital tools to hold our governments accountable, and what it means for states that try to hide the ball. Hey there. A quick favor. Things That Go Boom is conducting an audience survey, and we'd be so grateful if you could take just a few minutes and fill it out. If you're in, please visit survey.prx.org/boom to take the survey today. That's survey.prx.org/boom. Thanks. Biologist Katarzyna Nowak with the University of Warsaw is squishing her rain boots into a muddy road. She's taking producer Katie Toth along the same route that she takes to look for changes in the forest. They're surrounded by trees that are centuries old.
So this is a map of Puszcza Białowieska, of Białowieża primeval forest. And we are on Browska Road. And so we're about halfway to the border now, here at this junction of Browska and Koński Tryb.
This old-growth lowland forest is a rare and precious ecosystem. Rich underbrush feeds the little critters and saplings underfoot. More than 230 species of bird are out here, and at one point, while I'm out in the park, a deer just confidently darts across the trail. Katarzyna points out to me on the map where exactly we are.
You can see that this junction has been quite heavily used by vehicles. This was a sort of turning point for big vehicles last year, still is this year.
It was a big turning point because last year, Poland finished its border fence just 15 minutes down the road through this ancient UNESCO heritage forest. The environmental impacts of that wall are something scientists like Katarzyna are still trying to put a number on today.
We started monitoring roadkill and roadside tree damage and then other aspects of wall building and militarization in March of last year.
Katarzyna and her team are also looking beyond the wall itself. They're asking how even the road used to build a border fence and all of the new activity on that, trucks in and out full of people, raw materials, construction, how all that could further be hurting conservation and wildlife. Wildlife like a dead mouse we see on the side of the road. We stop so Katarzyna can take a look.
You know, I can't be 100% sure because she doesn't have any very visible vehicle tracks, but she could have just been kind of hit and then ended up on the side. So for now, I record her. I'm going to flip her over in a moment and just have a better look.
Katarzyna wants to get up close to the creatures that so many of us miss. But she's also looking for a bigger picture of what's going on out here. That's why, in an effort to understand the environmental impacts of this wall, she and other biologists are working on a network of 30 trail cameras. Those cameras will take tens of thousands of pictures. And to hear the story that those pictures want to tell, the scientists have to find a way to go through all of that information, which is where AI comes in.
We obtain around 90% of accuracy, so 90% of pictures are classified correctly. There are still some pictures which cannot be classified, but also by human observers. It's very difficult when there is a big distance between camera and individual, or they are partly on the other side of a tree and only part of a tail is seen. So you cannot be 100% sure that this is, I don't know, fox or raccoon dog or some other species. So those classificators are not perfect, but human observers are also not perfect.
That's Michał Żmihorski.
I am head of the Mammal Research Institute of the Polish Academy of Sciences, placed in Białowieża, Eastern Poland.
He works on the statistical analysis of both Katarzyna's research on the road and her project studying the impacts of the wall itself. A programmer at his institute created an image-reading web app trained on the Białowieża forest specifically to figure out what species were on camera.
There are some, for example, algorithms from Africa, but we cannot use them for our data set because species are different, landscape is different, so everything, the background is different. So they won't work. So they won't give you a reliable classification. So we need to use our own data, our own videos, our own pictures, or on our fauna to adjust those existing algorithms to our data set and our questions.
Michał explains that after a camera trapping session, biologists end up with tons of pictures that they need to make sense of. Machine learning algorithms, they cut the wheat from the chaff in days instead of months.
And then we can start some statistical modeling, explaining animal activity over time and across space. This is usually what we are most interested in.
Scientists like Michał look at the activity pattern of a given mammal species, like an elk or a wolf, and they see where they tend to go and what they tend to avoid. Then his team tries to understand how those patterns of behavior might be impacted by human presence in the forest.
And at the end, we are able to say, okay, In this habitat, wolf is much less active, for example, as compared to some other habitat. Or big road is also decreasing activity of this animal by 70% or something like this.
The barrier has now cost more than $400 million and slices Europe's oldest forest in half, which could mean more inbreeding of precious rare animals like bison and lynx. And just building it led to the introduction of invasive species in the area when one company dumped huge amounts of sand with foreign grass in it. As Katarzyna documents this all, she's also been asking a question. What if some of this impact on ecology could be mitigated? To answer that, she wants to figure out where any holes might be in the fence.
Areas which we assume do not have a barrier are here in the south, where there's the river Leshna. So it's very swampy here. And then here, near this reservoir, there's also some gaps, but we don't quite know where they are.
Katarzyna wants to know because she wants to know if the gaps could be matched up with the spots where animals naturally tend to cross between the Belarusian and Polish sides. It's part of a bigger challenge for her colleagues like Michał at the Mammal Research Institute.
If there is a need to build this kind of construction in middle of the primeval forest, then I guess, okay, I don't know, because I'm not an expert in this field. But if yes, then we should also think how to monitor these environmental costs of this construction. What can we learn? How can we mitigate? Maybe we could somehow adjust this wall construction to the needs related with biodiversity conservation.
But these aren't questions that Poland's current right-leaning government have been too keen to answer.
It's a pity that the government is deciding without informing anyone and without designing proper monitoring in advance.
Many professors and academics out here have been helping refugees with humanitarian aid. So, on one hand, it might seem like the Polish government sees these folks as a threat to the wall, one that can't be trusted to get near the details on it.
We asked for information from Polish Border Guard about where gaps in the barrier are associated with these swampy habitats and where the gates are, but we have not had a response.
On the other hand, this team is far from alone.
Now what happens is that the government is routinely rejecting or just simply ignoring. They don't even reject, they ignore claims for public information or they say something which is highly misleading, edited, impossible to make sense of.
I'm Maciej Kisilowski and I am a professor at Central European University in Vienna.
Maciej's not surprised by Katarzyna's experience. He says his country has seen a major shift over the past 8 years.
The story of Poland was really about this country being a frontrunner in democratization in 90s and early 2000s and access to public information. The Polish FOIA of 2001 was a very extreme piece of this democratic, optimistic pro-Western period. Everything that wasn't classified was presumed to be accessible by any citizen, and then the government had a very high bar to demonstrate that there is some national security or other narrowly defined reasons. But now the situation is completely different because what this law didn't do, and this was part of this story of the optimistic spirit of this period, it didn't impose any sanctions on public officials because it was unthinkable in 2001 that if the public official refuses to disclose and then the court tells them that this refusal is not warranted, it was unthinkable that the public official would not follow the court order.
For Maciej, the refusal to answer questions, the decision to build a wall, and the fear-mongering about refugees from Africa and Asia, it's all connected. As part of a country turning more and more away from transparency and toward authoritarianism.
I would also say it's strategically really stupid to show such a rough, inhuman face. And of course, Poland could have used it as an opportunity to show how different we are from Russia, from Belarus, and treat those people with respect, review their asylum claims, and of course, if there are no grounds for asylum, then deport them, of course, but do it in a humane way.
It's worth noting that Poland has become home to well over 1 million Ukrainian refugees since the beginning of the war. That leaves Maciej with a question.
Why can't we accept 30,000 of those people bamboozled by the Belarusian dictator whom we all detest?
As we worked on this episode, Poland was racing toward a parliamentary election where both the ruling party and the head of the largest opposition were feverishly trying to outdo each other on xenophobic rhetoric.
Mur na granicy z Białorusią musimy zbudować.
Zagranicznej naprawdę to serce rośnie.
The main opposition leader was saying that the wall wasn't aggressive enough at keeping people out, while the party that built the wall, even after it had been outed for a massive visas for bribes scheme, was touting its hardline defense of the Polish border.
The Law and Justice Party has also decided to hold a referendum on Election Day about the EU's asylum policy. Are you in favor of thousands of illegal migrants from the Middle East and Africa having to be taken in via the EU's coercive mechanism?
That is this disease that takes place when this nationalism, autocratic, hateful system, environment is being created, entrenched for years. It starts changing this subtle concept of what's reasonable. What are the reasonable arguments? What are the decent arguments that you can offer at a dinner table, yes?
There's a cruel irony here. The same rhetoric about national security that has made it harder and harder for migrants to get through the Polish border, leaving 48 people dead and 300 missing. It's the rhetoric that has made the Białowieża forest more closely watched than it has ever been before. It's full of security cameras, alarms, border police, and troops. And if some of that knowledge could just be shared with humanitarian aid workers or with scientists like Katarzyna, maybe they could help come up with new ways forward. Instead, those details are kept hidden behind filing cabinets and computer passwords. But as citizens around the world demand more transparency from their governments, lots of people are finding new ways to see what they're looking for. That's after the break. Before Eliot Higgins created Bellingcat, he was spending a lot of his time arguing with people in the comment section of the news online.
At that time in 2011, the kind of big news story was the conflicts in Libya. And at this time, there were videos and photographs coming from there that were a constant source of argument and debate. But I found it really frustrating that I just wanted to know what was going on. And there was clearly this useful kind of imagery coming out, but no one knew how to verify it. So it was being ignored. And that's why I first tried to start figuring out, okay, how do I know exactly where this video was filmed so I can actually confirm what's being said about it is true or not. And that really started me on a journey that's led to where I am now.
Today, he's the founder and creative director of an investigative team that's won multiple awards, including an Academy Award for the CNN documentary Navalny. And he's seen firsthand the kind of impact that open source tools can have on transparency.
We've got the abilities of what we might imagine an intelligence agency to have at the tip of our fingers.
Journalists, activists, scientists, there are a huge number of applications for these tools.
We've been tracking, for example, the illegal wildlife trade in Dubai, using Instagram posts by people who are posing with tiger cubs for just clicks, basically, to show how they're actually part of networks of illegal animal transfers.
But as impressive as all of that work might sound, none of the tools to get there were really all that fancy. It's stuff like Google Earth, or just Google in general.
Any search platforms that we can use to dig out information that's on the internet. This isn't something that's gated off by having to have expensive technology or specialized training or being able to pay expensive subscriptions. It's something that, with a bit of time and effort, you can sit down, learn these techniques yourself and start applying them.
In fact, Eliot's team collaborates with a whole army of volunteers and researchers who make public a lot of what they know.
We've got this kind of crowdsourced aspect to it now where that acts as a kind of real force multiplier when it comes to dealing with vast amounts of information. If you have a community of people who are processing it and making it available for other people to build on.
And since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that people power, the online version of Dr. Katarzyna Nowak's shoe leather research out in the woods, they've seen it really come of age.
Since 2022, you've seen a really big level of engagement with open source from the media, from ordinary members of the public who are kind of part of online communities who look at this stuff, from human rights organizations, people working on legal accountability. And because that community existed at the point of the invasion, there was a very rapid response to all kinds of different parts of this conflict, collecting, archiving, geolocating videos and photographs, debunking disinformation extremely rapidly.
Like with Bellingcat's work on the MH17 crash of 2014. 250 people in Amsterdam boarded a Malaysian Airlines flight for Kuala Lumpur and were shot down by Russian-backed separatists over the skies of eastern Ukraine.
Some of the earliest evidence in this case was discovered by civilians on the internet, and they were being led by this gentleman by the name of Eliot Higgins.
We now know that rebels had thought that it was a Ukrainian military plane.
And by chaining together all of these photographs and videos and the geolocation information, they were able to essentially draw the line of the convoy from a military base in Russia all the way to the firing position in eastern Ukraine.
In other words, despite years of denial, the breadcrumbs led back to Russian units involved from the outset of hostilities against Ukraine.
So it's been a really significant change, and I hope that in future conflicts there's enough support to spread the ideas of open source investigation to those conflicts that might not get the same level of attention as something like Ukraine, because I think in every conflict there's valuable digital evidence that can be used for understanding the conflict and seeking accountability for war crimes and other illegal acts that are committed in the war.
Maciej Kisilowski, who studies his native Poland from Vienna, isn't so optimistic about all of these tools. For him, especially in recent years, technology tends to be something used by his government to keep researchers and activists in line.
There was a huge Pegasus scandal in which the leaders of the opposition during the last election cycle in 2019 were simply spied on.
Pegasus, of course, being the Israeli software that was sold to all kinds of governments to spy on dissidents and journalists worldwide.
I'm fearful that because I'm speaking on those issues, that I am being surveilled by this Chinese tool that they are now using instead of Pegasus. So I wish I could give you a more hopeful story about technology, but my sense is that technology, unfortunately, mostly benefits the government, both in terms of surveillance and creating these bubbles that they then exploit with their trolls.
But while governments have always hidden information from their citizens or tried to manipulate the narrative for their own interests or surveilled, quote, problem people, Eliot says that now they aren't the only ones doing the watching.
We can now see so much available information. It's becoming more and more clear that the government isn't sharing all the information that's out there with us. I think we're in a kind of whole new world when it comes to citizens in relation to the intelligence community, because now individual citizens have access to things like satellite imagery. They see the same footage coming from the ground that's shared on social media that intelligence services are seeing.
That's one reason why a big part of Bellingcat's work involves training up others to use these tools.
We've trained all kinds of activists and lawyers and people working on advocacy work, human rights people, a whole range of people. And that's because this form of investigation isn't limited to one field of work. It's not just about journalism. It's not just about human rights, but it can be applicable across multiple fields.
They also train the folks they work with on the ground.
With Ukraine, we've actually taken some of the community members who are geolocating stuff and giving them training, both in geolocation and in vicarious trauma training, and have them as a smaller Bellingcat community that we run through something called the Global Authentication Project, where we task them with specific geolocations that are feeding into larger projects.
And Bellingcat does this in part because while the digital tools they use are pretty great, people are still the most important part of what they do.
I always think of it like this. If you've got a very simple question where you need quite a lot of knowledge to understand the answer, then asking a lot of people can be very useful. So, for example, there was a project run by Europol called Tracing Objects Stop Child Abuse. They had taken objects they'd cut out of child abuse imagery and asked the public to identify them. And that's a very simple task, but unless you know every object in the world, you aren't going to, as an individual, be very good at it. But if you have hundreds, thousands, even millions of people looking at one object and being asked, what is that object, you will get positive results. And we amplified that whole campaign with really great positive results. People were arrested, children were rescued, and this was simply amplifying that.
And the online citizens that are using these bits and bytes to catch criminals, many are also using those skills to hold their governments accountable.
And that's not to say that this process is the kind of be-all and end-all of accountability or journalism or human rights, but it's something that's very valuable and can be combined with more traditional methods to produce, I think, much more engaging and useful work.
Work that ultimately could be used to challenge governments at the highest levels.
I'm looking forward to the first time that we can really see open source investigation and evidence being used somewhere like the ICC, for example. We have seen a bit of it being used at the European Court of Human Rights and the International Court of Justice in the Ukraine versus Russia cases, a lot of which has included Bellingcat's work on MH17. That went very successfully, but it's kind of time to build on that success and make sure that in the future, when there's a conflict, when there's digital evidence, that stuff's collected, analysed, and made useful. We really want to make sure there's a process there that takes it from the phone is being filmed on all the way to a courtroom where a judge can see it and assess it, and it can be part of these legal cases. Because the reason people are on the ground filming this stuff in the first place is often because they want accountability.
And people go looking for that accountability in all kinds of ways. Katarzyna Nowak feels strongly that the public has a right to know just what kind of impact the wall on the border of Belarus and Poland is having. If Poland doesn't want to give out this information, she and other biologists can just keep walking, one muddy boot at a time.
We might walk the length of the Białowieża forest ourselves to do some mapping and then estimate where least cost paths are for various species on the basis of colleagues' data from the Mammal Research Institute. And then we might be able to say something about the locations of the gaps in relation to those least cost paths.
Least cost paths. It's referring to this idea that the wild is not an easy place in which to live. Our friends in the animal kingdom, they conserve energy by taking the simplest possible routes through the forest. Most machine learning programs do the same when they're trying to find patterns in data. And just like the forest creatures looking for paths around this wall, people are going to keep using all of the tools at their disposal to get to the data that they want to see, no matter what the state tries to do to block them. Whether we're animal or mineral, we're all just trying to get the clearest picture that we can, something that can make all the chaos easier to sort. Things That Go Boom is distributed by Inkstick Media and PRX. This episode was produced by Katie Toth and me, and edited by Nikki Galteland and Sahar Khan. Our music is composed by Darian Schulman, and Robin Wise makes our show sound its very best. Thanks to our supporters, the Carnegie Corporation of New York and Plowshares Fund, as well as the Colomb Foundation, Craig Newmark Philanthropies, Prospect Hill Foundation, and the Jubitz Family Foundation. We'll see you right back here in 2 weeks for our last episode of the season, and an opportunity to answer your questions. What should the U.S. be doing? Could it be doing more to promote democracy in the area? Is it turning a blind eye?
Oh, yeah, it's difficult to say if it could do more because it's doing so little that, yes, anything that it could do.